Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Stryd for the Love of Running webinar. As always, my name is Evan. I'm your host of the show. Today, we're going to be talking through understanding the power duration curve. This is something that we have recently started working on our stryd.com/guide, the new version of that. And we're really excited to keep presenting more and more information about this subject. So today, we're going to talk about the power duration curve, a couple layers of it, and we'll have more info on Stryd.guide specifically about the different things we're going to talk about today. Before we get started, I do want to ask anybody watching if you would like to give our YouTube channel a subscription, give it a thumbs up, leave any comments if you're watching live right now. Any questions, comments, anything you have while we're talking, we will absolutely get to them. And then during the middle of the presentation, maybe after the presentation, I also have stryd.com/PowerCenter here open to demo some of these features as well. It's very fun to play around with the power duration curve and show some of these working examples. Let's get into it, though. So starting off, what is the power duration curve? So the power duration curve is your best power output at any given duration from 1 second to many hours. In my case, I have a little bit over 2 hours of data in my account, but it can absolutely go up to the order of 3, 4, 5 hours. It's just the power that you can output for a certain duration. It happens to look like a nice curve shape. Typically, people should be familiar with the concept of the shorter the duration, the higher intensity that you can supply for that duration. So think of your 5K best effort, your 5K best wattage, your 5K best time. It should be faster than your 5K best effort, best wattage, best time. So the concept should be familiar to runners, athletes alike. The harder you go for a shorter amount of time, you can supply that harder effort versus extending that duration out. So the power duration curve is a great way to illustrate that concept. Talking more specifically about Stryd's power duration curve, which you can find in stryd.com/PowerCenter. You'll be able to view your activities over the past 90 days. We'll talk a little bit more specifically about this now. The power duration curve is broken down into 3 different sort of time frames, and we'll talk a little bit more about the different considerations that we take for that power duration curve as well. Run age is an important thing to know in the power duration curve. We can see from this slide here that we have a mixture, in my case, of some blue lines, some green lines, not too many gray lines, which is actually a good thing for me. This has to do with the run age of those activities. So the run age helps keep your best efforts fresh. The activities that are between 1 and 30 days old are highlighted in a blue line. The activities that are 31 to 75 days old are in a sort of green line. And then the activities that are between 76 and 90 days old, which are about to fall out of consideration, are in a gray line. So it's important to familiarize yourself, understand the mixture of the run age of your different activities. So in my case, we can see that for a lot of my shorter, higher duration, all the way up to about 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes, my activities are 1 to 30 days old. I have a pretty big section from about 4 minutes all the way through 15 minutes that is between 31 to 75 days old. This is about 45 days, I think, in my case. And then as we get more towards the extending time from 15 minutes all the way up to 2 hours, we have a little bit of a mix. So it's showing me that my current training, I'm doing a really good job of supplying best efforts over the past 90 days within the past 30 days. So I'm keeping my training very relevant in that section. And I'm actually going to be doing some longer tempo runs and some more higher sustained medium runs in the next couple of weeks. So I'm excited to make the green lines in my power duration curve a little bit more blue. But it's important to know the run age. It helps keep your best efforts fresh. It's important to understand that sort of concept when it comes to looking at the stryd.com/PowerCenter power duration curve. The last 90 days, why are we looking at the last 90 days? Well, this is a great balance of considering your training and detraining and the ratio between them. It also has to do with the period of time that's considered for the critical power model that we use for the Stryd Auto CP and that modeling. And 90 days is enough to capture, again, the balance between your training and your detraining. So if you start to do a lot less longer efforts over 90 days, you start to do a lot less shorter efforts, you're really focusing on the medium, that will be reflected in the power duration curve. And 90 days is really there to help illustrate that that longer period of time that training takes effect in, and shows sort of that relationship of how your training is actually going. It's a great way to illustrate it. The model curve, this is the next thing we're going to talk about. I mentioned the autocritical power model. For the power duration curve in PowerCenter, you can go up in the right-hand corner and toggle on and off the autocritical power model curve. There is just the simple toggle button, but next to it, I'd encourage anybody watching or listening that is unfamiliar with the modeled curve. We have some great information on this, not only in our stryd.com/guide, our YouTube channel. We've talked about this a lot, but we have a great sort of info section. If you actually go to PowerCenter, click on the little eye with the circle around it, it'll take you to an article all about the modeled curve. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more. When you toggle on the model curve, it puts a white power duration curve over the top of the mixture of blue, green, and gray lines that you have. The model curve accounts for your power duration curve, the three major energy sources, and depreciating contribution. So your power duration curve, all the data that you have put into PowerCenter, all the data that you've used Stryd, that gets taken into consideration. Again, your wattage over an extended duration, any duration from 1 second all the way up to many hours. We also balance your three major energy sources, and we draw a couple different curves, which I'll talk about in the next slide, as well as depreciating contribution. So that's why it's important to understand the difference between the 1 through 30 days, 31 through 75 days, and then 76 to 90 days. Those activities that have occurred over those separate amounts of time have different contributions to your power duration curve. Let's talk a little bit more in depth about the model curve and the energy systems. We determine the energy systems using your run data, so your actual run data, and it's broken down into sort of three different categories of immediate energy, oxidative energy, and non-oxidative energy. We model your abilities based on these three energy systems and kind of the ratio of how they go together. So a helpful infographic we have on the model curve information section, like I mentioned, if you go to the power duration curve, click the little eye with the circle around it, you can actually see this full article with a more in-depth explanation, but you can think of it as a balance between three major different types of contributions. The alactic energy system we've talked about, the anaerobic, and then all the way into aerobic. So it's sort of a balance, and that's what is kind of critical to understand, is how your power duration curve is balanced, because it will reflect the activities that you're presenting it, but will also gauge these different types of activities. So we've talked all in all about the importance of keeping variety and establishing a correct autocritical power. This is another reason why it's so important to have a variety of activities and intensities in your training. So let's talk a little bit more now about how you should actually use the power duration curve. Tip number one is find your best performances. So in this example here, we have my power duration curve. I took a screenshot of a highlight of my hill repeats. Typically for the shorter duration, we'll be able to output a little bit higher power if we're running up a harder incline, if we're putting out a good effort. So hard hill repeats are typically my best bet for pushing up that left side of the power duration curve. Let's actually jump into PowerCenter really quick and look at this sort of example here. So we can see this activity right here, hard hill repeats from Tuesday, July 21st, takes my 32-second ability all the way down to my 1-second ability. This is my best power output over the past 90 days, which I was super happy with. We can actually go in and view this run. This is another thing that I love about not only the illustration of the power duration curve, but the sort of ability that we have to be able to go into the power duration curve and actually understand our own running. So I can kind of mouse over this and understand how my different activities contribute to different sections here. So let's jump back into the slides and talk about the next consideration here. Next consideration is finding performance gaps. So when we turn on the model curve, we can go into the power duration curve and look at the difference in the disparity between the model projection and what we've actually done in reality. So you can see in my specific example, we'll hop back into my actual data here. I turn on the AutoCP model curve, and I can see the difference here. My modeled ability says for about 45 seconds, I can output 434 watts, and I have only done during an actual workout 406 watts for a 45-second repeat. I believe this is probably a 400-meter repeat that I did. So I should be able to run, just think of it practically, I should be able to run a 300-meter repeat faster than a 400. So this is probably accurate, and it's probably right. But this is showing me sort of performance gaps in that shorter end. But then if I go and mouse over all the way to into the 40-minute range, the 30 to 40-minute range, I can actually see where I have this disparity too. That's because I haven't raced anything or I haven't time trialed anything in that longer sustained effort, which totally makes sense. It's not that my power duration curve shows that I can only do 302 watts for 35 minutes. It knows that I can run at a higher power, at a higher effort than that. So this is something that is important to pay attention to, not only because the data that you supply doesn't always show your best ability, the modeled curve does show your best ability, even if you're not putting in necessarily those all-out efforts all the time. It's important to understand that. So hopping back in here for the next use here is finding where your run data matches the modeled curve. And this is important to know for a couple reasons. One, it shows you that you're kind of meeting the projections, but it also shows you might have an area where you can improve. If I were to go out and try and run a 14-minute and 20-second time trial, my goal based on my data and my modeled curve might be about 345 watts. Of course, I could always use the Stryd race power calculator, which you can find in your Stryd mobile app, or you can use the Stryd power calculator on stryd.com/PowerCenter. So I might be able to just simply look at my modeled curve and use this as a hard time trial or workout if I wanted to run maybe a sort of interesting race distance. I might want to run a 14-minute, or I might want to run, for me, this would be about 3 miles, somewhere around there. So this is important to know. It's important to understand the difference between having room for improvement and then understanding where your power duration curve actually meets the modeled curve. There are a couple other layers that I want to talk about now to the power duration curve. And the next layer is training distribution. So this is the chart that you can find to the right-hand side in your Stryd.com/PowerCenter power duration curve. It's called training distribution, and it is a way to compare to other runners similar to yourself, whether you're training for the same race, you're in the same age bracket. We'll talk about a couple of these categories. So fitness is the first category here, and this is based on your critical power. Your fitness score is based exactly on your critical power. Your critical power influences your training zones, workouts, and race abilities. The training distribution is not only important for showing how you stack up against the runners you compare against, but also understanding what types of efforts can help influence that specific section of your training distribution chart. So when you click into the fitness area of the training distribution chart, it shows that VO2 max intervals, lactate threshold, high volume easy runs, aerobic threshold tempo runs, and race specific training will help improve my fitness. That's pretty understandable. That's pretty much a given, but it's a very, very cool tuned message to help me improve my overall fitness. And if we hop back into PowerCenter here, I really like how things are illustrated on the power duration curve too. It helps me understand exactly where, if I mouse over fitness here, it brings up a dotted line, draws my critical power at 325, which it is right now, and it shows me exactly where that modeled ability is. So it shows me not only the activity that I have output for 42.5 minutes, but for me specifically, 325 is my modeled ability at my critical power right now. So important to kind of play around and understand that as well. So we're going to talk about these others, muscle power, fatigue resistance, as well as endurance. The other thing I really like is this comparative value here. My critical power right now is 5.16 watts per kilogram. It shows me that runners in the 20 to 29 age group with the goal of a marathon distance, their average is 4.1 watts per kilogram. So it helps me compare against the group that I am being compared to. So the next section here, we're going to talk about muscle power. This is based on your all-out sprinting ability, your all-out ability to supply power. So your muscle power score is based on your peak 10-second continuous power. A high power output for short periods of time can contribute to improved performance across your entire power duration curve. The suggested workouts for these types are your VO2 max intervals, hill and track repeats, and supplemental training. And if I were to click into these as well, I'd get some examples. So let's go back to PowerCenter here. I can draw a line and I can see exactly where my 10-second power output is. The Stryd watts per kilogram average for the 10-second power output in my age group is 6.23 watts per kilogram. I am 8.14, so that shows me I'm a little bit lower than near the highest like I might be in my overall fitness. So this could signal that, hey, this might be something that I can work on comparative to my peers. When I click into here, though, I really like being able to click in and see the different types of workouts here. So I might be interested in adding hill and track repeats into my training, and the power duration curve training distribution section shows me that very short repeats with long recoveries aimed at improving your ability to output higher power and your overall running efficiency. Short hill sprints can help you build strength and practice running fast with less chance of injury compared to flat sprints. So this is cluing me into different types of training I can do. Things like form drills or weightlifting is something in the supplemental training section that I can also add in there. So giving me a little bit more information specifically about how I can continue to improve. The next section here is fatigue resistance. And this is important to know that it's based on your goal race. So if you choose 5K, 10K, half, full, ultra, different distances for your race, the fatigue resistance will change. Your fatigue resistance score is based on the longest duration you can hold just below your target race power. Fatigue resistance directly reflects your ability to run at a close to maximal effort for your goal race distance. So because I chose marathon as my current goal race distance, my longest duration above 88% of my critical power is going to be my relevant and specific fatigue resistance. I would encourage people watching or listening to go into PowerCenter and look at the fatigue resistance and see how you stack up. For my data specifically, I stack up just a little bit above average. The Stryd average for my age group is 55 minutes and 58 seconds, and my personal fatigue resistance right now is 1 hour and 6 minutes, or 1 hour, 6 minutes and 13 seconds. So I think this probably comes from a 10-mile effort that I did in the middle of a long run, and I can actually understand and see exactly where this run comes from. So I can see that this whole section right here comes from the moderate long run, and I was able to output 286 watts, which is 88% of my critical power. Able to output that for about 1 hour and 6 minutes. So I can actually click into here, view the run straight from PowerCenter. While the activity loads, I can then see my 10-mile moderate section here. I can click on the lap here, and I can see that for this time period where I did this up-tempo section, this contributed the highest to my fatigue resistance, which is a really, really cool insight, something that I think helps you understand your overall training. And the suggested workouts to go along with fatigue resistance is, for me, long runs, high volume, easy runs, and aerobic threshold tempo runs, which makes total sense to me. Let's take a look at the last one here. The last one here is endurance. And this is based on your long run, your longest duration above 50% of critical power. Your endurance score is based on your longest or continuous duration above 50% of critical power. Building up your endurance with longer runs helps improve your body's ability to sustain efforts for long durations. Suggested workouts that contribute to this are, no surprise, aerobic threshold tempo runs, race-specific training for me because I am training for a marathon, as well as long runs. So very important to understand the things that help as well. So my longest duration above 50% at critical power is 2 hours, 4 minutes, and 58 seconds. Let's take a look here and see how I stack up. I am right at about average, which is actually really not surprising, but really encouraging for all the other people that are in my sort of category, runners age 20 to 29 with the goal of a marathon distance. You know, I stack up right in the middle, but there's a lot of people out there running these longer runs. So this might be motivating to me to start bumping up some of my long run durations as well. So some cool sort of things that we can understand not only about our power duration curve as individuals, but how we stack up and how our training is distributed based on that data from the power duration curve. That's the thing that I like to look at the most, I think. So let's go to the take-home points. So the take-home points that we want to talk about, we're going to cover a couple sections too in a couple of slides of asking some questions, and these are some of the take-home questions that we should reflect on. Take-home points are going to be familiarizing yourself with your power duration curve, comparing your data to the model curve. What does your run age breakdown look like? Do you have a bunch of activities that are blue, a bunch of activities that are green, a bunch of activities that are gray, and then understanding your training distribution chart. So first, what does your curve look like? What are your strengths? For me, I would say my strength is where my model curve meets my actual presented data from about 45 days ago, a nice 5K time trial. My strengths based on my power duration curve are going to be right in that section where I met that asymptote when I ran 341 watts for about 14 to 15 minutes, and that met right on my model curve. So that's my strength, is that sort of mid-range. When was the last time you pushed your limit? This is an important thing to understand. If you have a certain duration that is, let's say it's from 1 minute to 5 minutes, and it's about to fall out of consideration, it's between 76 to 90 days old, when was the last time you actually pushed your limit and you did a hard sort of effort? The power duration curve shows you more information about that specifically. The next point here is, how far are you from the model curve? Are you reaching your theoretical best? Right now, if you don't have a race on the calendar, it might be a good time to try and identify where you have a big gap in your model curve between the actual presented data that you have run with Stryd. And you might go out and you might try a hard time trial for that specific power range, that specific duration. I think that is something that's really fun about the power duration curve too, is you can see over time how you are actually stacking up against your theoretical best. Next point here is, what are your strengths versus your group? Again, so we talked about my strengths right now is my critical power. My strength right now might be my muscle power, how I'm a little bit above average in muscle power. I'm towards the right-hand side, so a little bit higher than my peers for the overall fitness, but I need to work on my fatigue resistance as well as my overall endurance. That's how I can understand how I stack up against my peers. So that's some of the considerations that we have. I would like to now turn it over for your questions. And I believe we've been sent some in here, and I will get to reading them right now. So first question we have is from Seth Westfall, and Seth asks, is there a way to exclude a run from the power duration curve calculation without deleting it? And yes, there is. If you go to the Stryd mobile app, I'm using the iOS version. If you go into the Stryd mobile app, you click into the activity, you can select to exclude it from your consideration. So that's important to do. If maybe you have a run where if you accidentally connected to somebody else's Stryd from your watch, if you haven't set your ANT ID in your watch on your Garmin, that might be something that has happened. So you might want to remove that from consideration, but you can absolutely go to the Stryd mobile app. And any questions to our support team at support@stryd.com is always available to answer and help with these sort of things as well. Next question here is: the auto CP leverages 90 minutes of the curve. How are we able to accurately predict marathon efforts, which may be in excess of 2, 3, 4 hours plus? I think this is a great question. I don't want to say anything wrong and stumble through, but I will show on PowerCenter here under critical power the full sort of literature that we have about the model curve. Let me see here. So in the auto CP model curve, we talk about why we use 90 minutes and why we use the specific sort of data. And you can find it in this section in the model curve as well. I think we might be able to get some links posted in the chat as well, specifically about that that question. But yeah, and producer Gus says he will post that as well. So look in the chat and the links for that. Let's see here. Next question is: can we describe the usual inflection in the model curve at around 1 minute to 2 minutes? Sure. I can totally do that. So for me specifically too, this is something that, you know, a lot of us are distance runners. We might not be as good at the short efforts versus a little bit longer than short efforts. So between 1 to 2 minutes, we have this sort of dip here, and this also is a sort of scaling thing too. So if we look at this section right here from 0 seconds, 1 second, all the way to 1 minute, we have this sort of scaling. And then as we start to go from 1 minute to 5 minute, it sort of scales a little bit differently too. The inflection point too is a real thing though, as a runner that has really good speed resistance, specific sort of fatigue resistance as well. You might be able to sustain that higher output, but this power duration curve does absolutely show the sort of difference between that 1 minute to 2 minute ability there. And I believe Steve Palladino was in the chat helping answer that question as well. Let's see, we have a couple other questions here too. And I guess I will talk about one thing really quickly. We have another webinar coming up very shortly after this, talking about comparing different power duration curves and understanding your training over time. That's going to be the next webinar that will come out next week. But you can use the power duration curve to help understand your training over time. So that defaults to the last 90 days, but we can use a sort of comparison over time. And I'll just give a quick demo over this. So let's look at my all of 2018 data, and then I want to compare it to all of my 2020 data. So we're going to load up all this data, and then we can start to see my not only modeled curve too, but we can start to see this sort of data here. So I actually am doing a great job in 2020 hitting the hill repeats really hard. This was something I neglected back in 2018. I really didn't do hill repeats that hard. I might have done a little bit better job from 40 seconds all the way out to about a minute in 2018. But in 2020, I've done a great job of setting some personal bests, some personal Stryd bests overall with Stryd. And we can see just over time, I do have some pretty interesting pieces of data that are compared, and we can see in 2020 overall too, I have not really done as hard of a effort over a longer period of time. So definitely a cool thing, a cool sort of feature to do is the comparing the date range. I can view my last 30 days versus last 90 days. But like I said, we're going to have a pretty cool webinar just talking a little bit more about how you can use different sort of functions on the comparison on the power duration curve. And that's going to be the next webinar that we do have. Producer Gus, do we have any other questions in the chat? I do want to remind people that we do these live. So if you'd like to get notified, you can either subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn the notifications on if you want to ask any questions live. We also stream these on our Facebook page. And we are always looking for feedback as well, but we're doing these weekly, and we're really excited to keep putting more content out there. The last thing I do want to mention as well as checking out the new Stryd guide. You can go to stryd.com/guide, where we'll be posting these webinars as well as relevant short pieces of content talking more specifically about the sort of information that we are putting out in these webinars. So this is a sort of tailing end of the past couple of videos that we have released on the power duration curve. This is going to be a little bit more long form content. So there's some people that might like listening to this in podcast form, watching this in short video snippets. And then also, if you're interested in the specific subject, watching the longer form videos on the webinar. But I would highly encourage people to go to stryd.com/guide, take a look. You can actually tell us what you want to see there too, which I think is the coolest thing. There's a little form to fill out. You can tell us what you're curious about, and that absolutely influences us on what sort of data that we're going to be putting out and what sort of presentations we're going to be putting out as well. So I think that wraps it up. I would be remiss to say if I didn't plug what Gus usually says. Stryd is in stock. If you go to store.stryd.com or just stryd.com, take a look at the homepage, store.stryd.com, if you'd like to purchase Stryd if you don't have one already. Otherwise, that wraps it up for today. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. We really do appreciate it, and we'll be back with another video shortly. Have a great one.